Discover why a simple family portrait surprised historians with a detail no one expected. Dr. Marcus Thompson adjusted his glasses as he sorted through another box of donated photos at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. He specialized in records from the Reconstruction era and had spent 3 months reviewing materials gathered from estate sales across the former Confederacy. This particular set came from the Whitmore family estate in Natchez, Mississippi. It included dozens of photographs, land papers, and personal documents from the 1870s through the early 1900s. Most showed scenes of wealthy white families, formal studio portraits, large homes, and carefully arranged family gatherings. Marcus picked up a studio portrait dated 1889. It showed a white family of 4, all dressed in fine clothing. But what stopped him was the 5th person in the photo. Standing slightly apart from the group was a young black girl, around 10 years old. She wore a well-made dress with lace trim, and her hair was neatly styled. Her posture was stiff, and her expression seemed controlled and hard to read. What struck Marcus was how she was placed. She wasn't posed like a servant or pushed to the background. She was included in the portrait, but kept just far enough away to show she wasn't considered part of the family itself. Marcus scanned the image and zoomed in. The white family members looked directly at the camera with confident expressions. The young girl's eyes, however, looked tired in a way unusual for a child. Her dress appeared to be made of expensive fabric, possibly silk or fine cotton, with detailed embroidery. Clothing like that was not usually given to household workers. He turned the photo over. On the back was a short note in neat handwriting. The Whitmore family with Sarah. Natchez Studio, April 1889. Only her first name. No explanation of her connection to the family. Marcus had seen many photos of black children living in white households, but this one felt different. The fine clothing, the placement in the portrait, and the formality of it all pointed to something more complicated than a standard servant relationship. He searched the 1890 census for the Whitmore family and found them listed. Robert Whitmore, a cotton merchant. His wife, Margaret. Their 2 sons, James and Thomas. And then one more entry. Sarah, age 10, listed as a servant. This didn't match what he saw in the photograph. Servants were sometimes included in portraits, but they were usually dressed for work, not in clothing as expensive as the family's. Marcus dug deeper into the Whitmore records. Within an hour, he found something that made him sit back in his chair. Robert Whitmore's land records for 1889 showed that he owned 200 acres of valuable cotton land. But the land had originally belonged to someone else, Joshua Carter, a black landowner. That alone was rare enough to catch Marcus's attention. He searched for more information. Joshua Carter appeared in the 1870 census as a freedman who owned his own land, valued at a significant amount for that time. But by 1880, Joshua was gone. His wife was listed as a widow, and the family had moved north in 1879. Marcus felt a familiar jolt that came when a hidden story began revealing itself. Something had happened between 1870 and 1880 that forced Joshua Carter's family from their land. Now, 10 years later, a black girl named Sarah was living in the Whitmore home, wearing fine clothes and appearing in a formal family portrait. He spent the next 2 days studying property files, wills, and court records from Adams County. The picture that formed was painful and complex. Joshua Carter had been born into slavery around 1835. After emancipation, he saved enough money to buy 200 acres of land in 1868. The original deed showed he paid for it in full, signing his name in careful handwriting. Over the next decade, he succeeded as a farmer and even added more land. But starting in the mid-1870s, the political climate shifted. New laws restricted black voters, and violence against black landowners increased. Marcus found a newspaper article from 1878 accusing Joshua Carter of owing debts to white merchants. These types of claims were commonly used to take property from black families. Court records showed that Joshua fought the accusations, insisting the debts were false. Still, the case was decided against him by an all-white jury. In early 1879, he was ordered to pay a large sum or give up his land. His property was seized and sold at auction. Robert Whitmore bought it for far less than its value. Marcus searched for records of Joshua's death, but found nothing. The 1880 census listed his wife, Ruth, living in Chicago with their 3 children. No sign of Joshua. It was likely that he had been killed during the conflict over his land, and his family had fled for safety. But something didn't fit. The Chicago census listed 3 children, Rebecca, Joshua Jr., and Samuel. There was no Sarah. That raised a new question. If Sarah wasn't listed with Ruth Carter's family, then who was the girl in the Whitmore portrait? The 1870 census for Joshua Carter's home in Mississippi listed 4 children, Rebecca, Joshua Jr., Samuel, and Sarah, who would have been about 1 year old at the time. Marcus felt a chill. Sarah had not gone north with her mother and siblings. She had stayed in Mississippi, living with the family that now owned her father's former land. He needed to understand how and why she was left behind. He called Dr. Lorraine Mitchell, a colleague at Howard University, who studied black family records from the years after Reconstruction. "I'm sending you document from Adams County," Marcus said. A black landowner named Joshua Carter lost his property through false debt claims in 1879. His wife and 3 children escaped to Chicago, but one daughter, Sarah, seems to have remained behind with the family who took over the land. How old was Sarah at the time? Lorraine asked. About 10 based on the records. The same age she appears in a photo from 1889. That matters, Lorraine said. Children that age were sometimes kept when families fled violence. Some were said to be working off debts. Some were taken and forced to work. And sometimes they were kept so their families wouldn't fight back. Marcus felt uneasy. You're saying Sarah might have been kept on purpose. It's possible. I've seen many cases like this. Families who took land from black families often kept a child and claimed it was voluntary or payment for debts. But these children didn't have a choice, and their families had no safe way to retrieve them. Marcus thanked her and kept searching. He looked for legal paperwork that might explain why Sarah was in the Whitmore home. He found an answer in a probate file from April 1879, only 1 month after the land was taken. The document was labeled as an indenture agreement. Marcus felt his hands tremble as he read it. It stated that Sarah Carter, age 10, was being voluntarily indentured to Robert Whitmore for 10 years to learn household work in exchange for food, shelter, and religious instruction. At the end of the 10 years, she was supposed to be released with a $50 payment. The agreement was signed by Robert Whitmore and supposedly by Ruth Carter, Sarah's mother. But Marcus knew the timing was off. Census records showed Ruth had already fled to Chicago by April 1879. She could not have signed anything in Mississippi. The signature had either been forced or added without her consent. Marcus looked into how these agreements were used in Mississippi during that period. He found that they were often used as a way to keep black children in unpaid labor even after slavery had ended. While the law no longer allowed slavery, it still permitted forced labor for people convicted of crimes. Some states used this to charge black adults with minor or false offenses and make them work without pay. But this did not apply easily to children. So indenture contracts were used instead. These agreements claimed children were working by choice, though that was rarely true. Sarah Carter's situation fit the pattern. Her father was gone. Her mother and siblings had left the state, and Sarah had been kept through a contract she had no power to refuse. Marcus also found proof that Whitmore officially filed the indenture contract in April 1879, making it valid under state law. Even if Ruth had tried to challenge it, she would have had no legal support in Mississippi. Returning to fight for her daughter might have put her in danger. Still, the 1889 photo showed Sarah living with the Whitmore family 10 years later, long past the end of the contract. She should have been free to leave. Yet she was still there, dressed well, and included in family photos. Marcus sensed there was something more he had not yet uncovered. He reached out to the Adams County Historical Society in Natchez. The director, an older woman named Eleanor Hayes, replied to his email quickly. "I'm familiar with the Whitmore family," she wrote. "We have several boxes of their papers and photographs. You are welcome to review them here." Marcus booked a flight. While waiting, he continued researching Ruth Carter's life in Chicago. He found her death record from 1895. She had worked as a laundress and raised her 3 children there. Her obituary listed those 3 children, with no mention of Sarah. Marcus wondered if Ruth had been forced to remain quiet about her missing daughter, if she had tried to find her, or she had believed Sarah had not survived. When he arrived in Natchez, Eleanor Hayes welcomed him at the Historical Society building, which had once been the home of a cotton merchant. She brought out several boxes of Whitmore family records. "I should tell you," she said, "the Whitmore history is complicated. There were things people didn't discuss openly, but many in Natchez knew about them." Marcus opened the first box. Inside were photographs from the 1870s to the 1920s. He soon found more pictures of Sarah, documenting almost 20 years of her life in the Whitmore home. An 1890 photo showed her at what looked like a holiday gathering. She still wore fine clothing and stood near the family, but slightly apart. Her expression remained guarded. A photo from 1893 showed her as a teenager. She stood on the front porch of the Whitmore home in a simple but well-made dress. Her expression had shifted. She still held herself carefully, but there was a strength in her eyes. Then Marcus found the photograph that made him pause. It was from 1895, taken at Robert Whitmore's funeral. The family stood around his casket. Margaret Whitmore wore mourning clothes. The two sons, now adults, stood beside her. And there was Sarah, about 16, dressed in mourning attire and standing with them as part of the group. She held a folded paper in her hands, a document that looked formal, perhaps legal. Marcus searched the boxes until he found a folder labeled Estate Documents. Robert Whitmore, 1895. Inside was Whitmore's will, written only months before he passed away. Marcus read carefully until he reached the section that explained everything. "To Sarah Carter," the will stated, "who has lived in my home since 1879, I leave $2,000 in full ownership of the 200 acres known as the Carter property, which she is entitled to as the heir of Joshua Carter." Marcus sat back in disbelief. Whitmore had returned the land on his deathbed. He had acknowledged that Sarah was the rightful heir. But Marcus needed to understand what had happened between 1879 and 1895 to lead to this choice. He spent the rest of the day reading letters and papers from the Whitmore home. Early letters from 1879 and 1880 referred to the Carter girl doing household chores. Sarah was clearly treated as a worker, despite the nice clothing in the photographs. But then Marcus found a letter from Margaret to Robert written in 1882. It revealed something important. The girl is unusually bright. She has been watching our sons study with their tutor and has learned to read and do arithmetic just from listening. Yesterday, I caught her reading James's Latin book. When I asked her about it, she repeated whole passages from memory. I do not understand how she managed this, since we never permitted her to study. Still, I cannot deny she has somehow learned. Marcus understood what this meant. Sarah, unable to leave the Whitmore home, had been teaching herself whenever she could. Learning in secret was her way of staying strong and building a path forward. Another letter from 1884 showed that Margaret was struggling with how to treat Sarah. The girl is 15 now, and she cannot continue as a simple servant. She speaks as well as our sons, reads better than I do, and has started asking questions about her father's land and how she came to live with us. I think she knows something wrong was done. Robert, we must decide what to do when her indenture ends next year. Marcus realized Sarah had not stayed silent. As she grew older, she educated herself, pushed for answers, and refused to accept the place she was expected to occupy. In another box, Marcus found a journal written by Robert Whitmore. The entry spanned from 1885 to 1895 and showed a man wrestling with regret as he grew older. January 1885. Sarah's indenture ended today. By law she is free, but she has nowhere to go. Her family is in Chicago, and she has no money to travel. I offered her wages, $5 a month, to stay on as a paid worker. It eases my guilt, though I know it does not correct a greater wrong. But Sarah did not simply accept this new arrangement. A journal entry from March 1885 described their confrontation. Sarah came to my study today with old papers and property records she had found. She said I had taken her father's land and ruined her family. She told me the land belonged to her and that she would reclaim it one day. I was shaken. She had pieced together the entire story on her own. Marcus was stunned. At 16, Sarah had investigated her own past, gathered documents, and confronted the man responsible for her family's loss. More entries revealed that her determination only grew. June 1888. Sarah refuses to act as a servant now. She insists on being called Miss Carter, eats meals with us, and wants to meet with legal counsel about her inheritance. Margaret is distressed, but I cannot deny her requests. Something in her reminds me of Joshua Carter. The same strength, the same refusal to bend. November 1893. I am dying. The doctor says I may have a year or two. I think constantly of Joshua Carter and what I took from him. Sarah spent 14 years in our home, years that should have been her own. The land that should have been hers has supported my family instead. I must put this right. January 1895. I have changed my will. The Carter property will go to Sarah. It is hers by inheritance. My conscience demands that I return what was taken. My sons are furious. But justice is not always the same as legality. Sarah deserves her father's legacy. Marcus sat back, absorbing everything. Whitmore had taken Joshua Carter's land through false claims, and Sarah had been forced into years of unpaid labor. Yet Sarah had refused to give up. She taught herself, uncovered the truth, confronted Whitmore, and pushed him to return what was hers. But Marcus still needed to know what happened after Whitmore died. He returned to the documents, searching for records from late 1895 and beyond. What he found showed that Sarah's struggle was not over. Whitmore died in March 1895. His will was filed the next month, and immediately his sons James and Thomas challenged it. Marcus found a court filing. Whitmore heirs versus Sarah Carter, Adams County Chancery Court, May 1895. The brothers claimed their father had not been of sound mind when he changed his will. They argued that Sarah had influenced him in that, as a former indentured worker, she could not legally inherit property. Their filing used harsh language and painted Sarah in an unfair light. They asked the court to cancel the part of the will that gave her the land. But Sarah did not give up. She fought back with the help of Benjamin Foster, one of the few black lawyers in Mississippi during that time. Her legal response was detailed and carefully prepared. She included proof of her father's original land purchase, evidence that the debt claims had been false, details about the forced sale of the property, and information about her own indenture. She argued that Whitmore's bequest was not a gift, but an attempt to correct a serious wrong. Sarah had even located the original deed from 1868. She found witnesses who remembered Joshua Carter and stated he had never owed the debts claimed. She even found a former courthouse clerk who said some signatures from 1879 did not look genuine. The trial began in September 1895. Newspaper articles clearly sided with the Whitmore family, but they also revealed that Sarah testified with confidence and stayed calm through tough questioning. One article quoted her, "My father lost his life because he succeeded as a black landowner. I was kept in a home where I worked for years without pay. Mr. Whitmore admitted these wrongs before he died. His sons now try to continue what was done to my family. I only want what is mine, the land my father earned." The trial lasted 3 weeks. Marcus found a final decision, issued in October 1895. His heart sank. The judge ruled for the Whitmore brothers. He said too much time had passed to revisit the events of 1879. He also stated that Whitmores could not remove the son's inheritance rights. The land stayed with the Whitmores. Sarah lost her case. Marcus felt a heavy sense of unfairness reading the ruling. Sarah had done everything she could, yet the system still failed her. But her story did not end there. In a folder of personal letters, he found one dated November 1895, written by Sarah to her mother in Chicago. "Dear Mother, I have lost a case for Papa's land. The courts would not bring justice to our family, but I have not lost everything. I have gained knowledge, strength, and a clear view of how things work here. I am leaving Mississippi for Chicago. I will find you, my brothers and my sister, and we will rebuild ourselves. We may not have the land, but we still have each other." Marcus knew he needed to follow her life from that point. He contacted historians in Chicago to search for records of Sarah's arrival and her reunion with her family. Dr. Patricia Washington, a historian at the Chicago History Museum, replied excitedly, "The Carter family appears in many records from the black community here in the late 1800s and early 1900s," she said. Ruth Carter worked hard to support her children. Joshua Jr. became a postal worker. Rebecca married and had a family. And Sarah's story here is truly remarkable. Patricia sent documents showing that Sarah reached Chicago in December 1895. At 17, she used a $2,000 from Whitmore's with the only part the sons could not challenge to travel north and start a new life. The reunion between Sarah and her family was recorded in a letter Ruth Carter wrote to a friend, preserved in a church archive. She wrote, "My daughter Sarah has come back to me after 16 years apart. I feared I would never see her again after we fled Mississippi. The pain of leaving her behind has weighed on me every day. Now she is here. She has suffered, but she is strong and ready to start new." The 1900 census confirmed that Sarah was living with her mother in Chicago and working as a teacher at a small school for black children on the South Side. This was remarkable. Despite never having formal schooling, Sarah had learned enough during her years in the Whitmore household to become a teacher. Marcus found articles from the Chicago Black Press describing Sarah's growing involvement in community work. A Chicago Defender piece from 1902 described a speech she gave at a church meeting. Miss Sarah Carter, recently from Mississippi, spoke about the widespread loss of land among black families in the South. She described her own experience, how her father's property was taken through dishonest legal tactics, and how she spent 16 years trying to reclaim it. She urged the community to record these cases and oppose such injustice. Sarah had become an advocate, using her own life story to highlight how many black families lost land in the years after Reconstruction. Patricia sent Marcus a pamphlet from 1905 published by the Chicago Urban League titled Theft of Negro Property in the Post-War South. Sarah was listed as a co-author. The pamphlet included detailed accounts of families who lost their property through threats, false claims, and unfair laws. In the introduction, Sarah wrote, "Between 1865 and 1900, black families in the South gained land through hard work and legal purchase. But through violence and illegal actions, much of that land was taken. My father's experience reflects what happened to many others. We must record these wrongs and push for restitution." The pamphlet also included Sarah's own detailed account of what happened to her family. She had turned her trauma into research that would help others. Marcus found that Sarah married in 1908. Her husband, William Morrison, was also a teacher and community advocate. They had 3 children, and both continued their work for many years. But Patricia had added an important note. Sarah stayed in contact with several families in Adams County, Mississippi. She never let go of her goal to reclaim her father's land or seek answers about his death. Through the 1920s and 1930s, she helped document other cases of land loss and supported legal challenges. "You should look into the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History," Patricia said. Sarah was connected with that group. Marcus realized Sarah had become part of a much larger effort to record and confront the loss of black property in the United States. Following this lead, he contacted the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, known today as ASAL. Their archives held a large collection related to Sarah's decades of work. The archivist, James Crawford, welcomed Marcus warmly. Her work was groundbreaking, James said as he pulled out several boxes. She spent more than 30 years documenting cases of stolen property. Her research helped support legal challenges in the 1930s and 40s. The first document Marcus opened was a bound volume titled Stolen Inheritance, Documentation of Property Theft from Negro Families in Mississippi, 1870 to 1920, compiled by Sarah between 1910 and 1935. It held more than 200 case studies detailing how black families lost land through false claims, threats, or violence. Sarah had traveled back to Mississippi multiple times in the 1910s and 1920s to collect records and speak with older residents who remembered the Reconstruction years. She documented consistent patterns of land loss that had stripped many families of the chance to pass wealth to future generations. Her own family's case appeared as case number 47. It read, "Joshua Carter Adams County, Mississippi. 200 acres taken through fraudulent debt claims, 1879. Landowner likely killed. Daughter Sarah held in forced service, 1879 to 1895. Property still in possession of Whitmore descendants as of 1935. But Sarah did more than collect stories. Marcus found letters showing she worked with the NAACP and other groups to support legal challenges. Several families used her research to file lawsuits in hopes of reclaiming their land. Most of these efforts failed, blocked by strict deadlines and law, and courts unwilling to revisit old cases. But Sarah kept going, believing that recording the truth mattered even when the system would not provide justice. In a 1932 letter to W.E.B. Du Bois, she wrote, "Our legal efforts have mostly failed, but the records we are creating will last. Future generations will know what was taken from us, how families were pushed aside, and how we resisted. This knowledge is important, even when we cannot recover the land." Marcus found evidence that Sarah tried 3 times to reclaim her father's property in 1910, 1925, and 1938. Each time, the court dismissed her case. Then Marcus discovered something unexpected. A letter from 1938 written by an attorney named Robert Whitmore III, the grandson of the man who had taken Joshua Carter's land. It began, Robert Whitmore III wrote to Sarah in 1938 after discovering that his grandfather had taken her father's land. He admitted the truth, expressed regret, and offered to return the property. Sarah responded carefully, asking why he wanted to act after so many years. Whitmore explained that reading his grandfather's papers and having children of his own pushed him to do what he felt was right. Sarah struggled with the offer. She was 70. Her family lived in Chicago, and none of them planned to return to Mississippi. After seeking advice, she chose a different path. She asked that the land be placed in a community trust to support Black residents of Adams County through education and local programs. Whitmore agreed, and in 1940 the property was transferred to the Joshua Carter Memorial Fund, turning land once taken from her family into an investment in future generations.